Welcome to everybody. So here we are with Dr. Mihaela Timus, and we have this very interesting topic to analyze thanks to her work. And for us in the Secretary School in Florence, this is the first time that we do a section in English. We call this kind of classes dialoghi per capire. So they are dialogue to understand. And actually, in the intervention of Mihaela will be really very interesting because she is an expert in the old ancient Iraqi world, so Zoroastrian tradition and the Christian Judeo tradition will be analyzed together. So I met Mihaela because she was interested in coming to our school, interested in painting actually, and then we understood that we have in common also these studies about religion. So just to give a few information about Mihaela, she received her PhD in Paris in the School of High Studies in the section of religious science in 2009. She is co-founder of the Institute for the History of Religions of the Romanian Academy. This happened in 2008. And she was associated researcher to Collège de France in 2013 and 2015. And then also she spent 2 years in Germany in the Alexander von Humboldt Fellow Institute for Iraqinist in German. So she wrote many publications, but I think that the best way is just to give to her the word so that she can speak about the topic. Thank you, Mihaela.
No, thank you very much, Giancarlo. And good evening, everybody. All people that I know that I met maybe in Florence last summer, and all colleagues and friends. So welcome, everybody. And I will hide myself also. So we will try to see if the PowerPoint is going on. Is this fine?
Yes, it's fine. Everything
Yes,
is
thank
fine.
you very much for your feedback. So I would like to thank Giancarlo Polenghi, who had the generous idea to value my previous work, which is a monograph on the Zoroastrian cosmogonic and eschatological ideas, a book printed in 2015, a reshaped part of my PhD defended in 2009 at l'École pratique des hautes études in Paris at the Sorbonne. And on the other hand, the outcome of my private artistic activities, which I developed during this pandemic period. So I would like to dedicate this talk to two persons dear to me, Mariana and Sandu Voicu, who celebrate today 2 special anniversaries. And I also, because life is full of unexpected events, good or bad, I have to add a thought of compassion and gratitude to the memory of Professor Shaul Shaked, Professor Emeritus of Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who unfortunately passed away yesterday. So, a distinguished scholar of Middle Persian and Aramaic studies, a historian of religions himself, and I hope that the present talk is in tune with the spirit of his researches. And I would also like to add a word of compassion to his wife, Miriam Shaked, who was born in Romania, and to his family. So today I would like to propose a short comparison between the creation vision according to 2 religious traditions. On the one hand, the one of the Genesis book, which opens the Old Testament, offering a vision shared by both Jewish and Christian traditions. And on the other hand, the one of the Zoroastrian religion, which is one of the most ancient and still living religions in the world. It is still practiced nowadays by a number of around 80,000 followers who are active in Iran, India, UK, the United States, Canada, or China. I should say from the very beginning that I'm not a historian of art myself, but I am happy to share here with you a selection of the marvels I could see in original last summer in Florence, while I were a student myself in painting and drawing of the Scuola di Arte Sacra of Florence. So I would like to propose you a short reading of the introductory paragraphs of the Genesis book as according to the English translation of the Bible of La Bible de Jérusalem, the Bible of Jerusalem. So, and this reading is accompanied by iconographical representations from the mosaics which adorn the inner walls of the cathedral in Monreale, which finds itself in the metropolitan city of Palermo in Sicily, and they are dated. These iconographical monuments are dated. The mosaics are dated from the 12th to 13th century. So let's see the text in their simple letters. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was a formless void, there was darkness over the deep, and God's Spirit hovered over the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God called light day, and darkness he called night. Evening came and morning came, the first day. I will emphasize this final phrase, which is repeated every time when a day of the creation is repeated, is presented. Evening came and morning came. A second day, um, God said, "Let there be a vault in the waters to divide the waters in two." And so it was. God made the vault, and it divided the waters above the vault from the waters under the vault. God called the vault heaven. Evening came and morning came, the second day. As you can see, the image on the right faithfully follows the text by figuring very clearly the waters above the vault and the waters under the vault. The third day, God said, "Let the waters under heaven come together into a single mass, and let dry land appear." And so it was. God called the dry land earth, and the mass of waters seas. And God saw it was good. God said, "Let the earth produce vegetation, seed bearing plants and fruit trees bearing fruit with their seed inside on the earth." Evening came and morning came, the third day. On the fourth day, God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of heaven to divide day from night, and let them indicate festivals, days, and years. Let them be lights in the vault of heaven to shine on the earth." And so it was. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the smaller light to govern the night. Evening came and morning came, the fourth day. It is clear that the greater light to govern the day is a sun, and the smaller light to govern the night is a moon. On the fifth day, God said, "Let the waters teem with living creature, and let birds fly above the earth within the vault of heaven." And so it was. God created great sea serpents and every day of living creature with which the waters teem, and every kind of winged creature. God saw that it was good. Evening came and morning came, the fifth day. On the sixth day, God said,
Let the earth produce every kind of living creature, cattle, reptiles, and every kind of wild beast. And so it was. God said, let us make man in our own image, in the likeness of ourselves, and let them be masters of the fish of the sea, the birds of heaven, the cattle. God created man in the image of himself, in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. Evening came and morning came the sixth day. And the last day of the week, the seven on the seventh day, the heaven and the earth were already completed with all their array. On the seventh day, God completed the work he had been doing, and he rested on the seventh day after all the work he had been doing. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on that day he had rested after all his work of creating. Such were the origins of heavens and earth when they were created. So this is a description of the creation process as according to the Genesis book in the Old Testament. Now, this it is less known for me where from these mosaics come. Most likely, their source of inspiration is a Byzantine art. But it should be mentioned that there were also codexes circulating between East and West, like the illustrated manuscript known as the Vienna Genesis, which is a luxurious codex written down on purple parchment, and which might have been accomplished in Syria by the 6th century. It contained the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament version of the Bible, known also as the Septuagint, and to which I will make reference here later on. The quotation I have just given you are according to the Hebrew version of the Old Testament. The various books were accompanied by illustrations. The various books of the Old Testament were accompanied by illustrations, as one can see on this folio of the Vienna Genesis, one of the few remaining. It is when you can see here the story of Adam and Eve, the temptation story, and the expulsion of this primordial human pair out of paradise. Unfortunately, almost nothing is known about the early historical context of this codex. Um, Most likely, the mosaics of the Monreale Cathedral are the only iconographical documents in the Western art, or the last ones, illustrating into detail each one of the days of the creation. A bit later on, by the 13th up to 14th century, the mosaics of the Baptisterium of Florence, for instance, will not reproduce anymore into detail all the 6 steps of the creation process concluded with the seventh day of the divine rest. The story of the creation is condensed in a single image, as one can see here. See, here is one of the mosaics, and here is the context where one can see of the cupola of the baptisterium. And much later on, in his own way, in the way of his naive painting, the Russian French painter Marc Chagall, known for his numerous illustrations to the Bible, will give himself a representation of the creation process concentrated in a single image, as one can see here. Beginning with the 13th and 14th century, the iconography related to the Genesis book of the Bible is much more focused on its second and third chapters, on the appearance of the first human pair, man and woman, Adam and Eve, on their journey through the Garden of Eden, the temptation and the expulsion out of paradise. This is what one can often see in various contexts, like the mosaics of the Baptisterium of Florence here, or on the sculpted scenes of the bell tower of the Dome of Florence, um, which are attributed either to Andrea Pisano or to Giotto. People, please correct me if at the end of this talk if I'm wrong, or like Pacino. So these are the details of these wonderful sculptures, which are nowadays, the originals are nowadays preserved in the Opera del Duomo di Firenze, or like in the iconography of Pacino di Buon Guida. In the lower part of his famous Tree of Life, or Lignum Vitae, which one could see on display last summer in the Bargello Museum of Florence, these scenes are also represented. And Buon Guida, I would like to mention here, counts also among the first illustrators of Dante's Divine Commedia. This tradition will culminate in the 15th century with a big format Temptation scene by Masolino da Panicale. One can see in the Cappella Brancacci in the Florentine church Santa Maria del Carmine, or with the expulsion scene by Masaccio, dramatically displaying Adam's shame and Eve's defigurating suffering. One can see very well here. And this painting is also kept in the same Cappella Brancacci. Now, at least and last but not least, in a similar vein, and again in his own naive way, Marc Chagall will figure out the same scenes, the creation of man and Eve's creation out of Adam. Now, getting back to the 6 steps of the creation process as described to the Genesis book, by summarizing, as I had a summary here, I will go back. By summarizing, one can notice that the 6 days of the creation put forward a kind of network of elements. So the first day, one sees the appearance of heaven and earth and of light as well. On the second day, on a second day, the waters above and the waters below. On another day, animals and plants are supposed to populate the earth. And on the last day, mammifers are created, like birds and animals and mankind. And this is a detail I would like to emphasize, because I will get back and might be useful in the comparison with the Zoroastrian doctrine of the creation. Now, within the history of Christianity, the first book of Genesis inspired a whole rich tradition of exegetical commentaries known as the Hexameron literature. The most important names, I will go just a few ones, are Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan in the 5th century, Saint Augustine or Augustine of Hippo from the same period, a few Syriac authors like Jacob of Serug from the 5th to 6th century, or Jacob of Edessa, 6th to 7th century. Ambrose seems to have been the most influential, and his commentaries on the Genesis book were most likely included in his pulpit sermons he publicly gave. Now, I would like to refer here particularly to St. Augustine, who wrote extensively on the topic, on this topic. There are 3 main works as follows: on Genesis, which is a refutation of the Manichaeans, an unfinished literal commentary on Genesis, and a third work, which is a literal meaning of Genesis. And each of these works could make the object of longer series of talks or of classes for 1 year. But I would like to quote, as you can see here, um, uh, um, to give a quotation of one of these works, because the story of these first days of the creation of the world was not devoid of criticism. From the very early stages, one noticed that there were some proeminent incoherences. From the very first day of their creation, as I underlined while reading, the text repeats that there was evening, that evening came and morning came. But more than one wondered how could there have been evening and morning while the luminaries, the sun and the moon, were not created but on the fourth day of the creation. And this is one example, and such criticism occurred, for instance, as early as the third century of Christ era, with a personality like Mani, the founder of Manichaeism, who conceived himself a quite complex cosmogonic vision. On the screen, you can see a reference of Saint Augustine taken out of his first work. I wrote it on Genesis, where in fact he quotes this position of the Manichaean. He says here the first question they ask, they in this context are the Manichaeans, they ask is how it was on the fourth day that the constellations were made, that is, sun and moon and stars. How, after all, could the 3 previous days have been without the sun, since now we see that it takes the rising and the setting of the sun to complete a day? So this post-critical position is already mentioned by um, Saint Augustine. Now, I found it relevant to mention such a detail, and particularly this work of Saint Augustine, um, who himself um, belonged to this religious community as an auditor, a layman follower, for around 9 years before becoming a Christian himself. Manichaeism was a religion which occurred by the third century, so a bit before Augustine, in the Persian Empire, and um, um, and um, found itself under the reign of the so-called Sasanian dynasty. You can see here the 2 towns where Mani was born. So where Mani lived, he was born in Ctesiphon on the nowadays territory of Iraq, and he died in Gundeshapur in the nowadays Iran. So I'm a series of kings, some of which, the Sasanian dynasty, the historians of the Christian church might be familiar with some of the most famous Sasanian kings. For instance, the Byzantine king Heraclius was fought often against Khosrow II, the last important Sasanian king before the Arab conquest of Iran. Now, Mani was born, so as I said, in the Persian Empire. He knew the language spoken in the empire, which was the Middle Persian. And I am pleased to give you such details because they are a good introduction to the second part of my talk and to the second comparison term I propose you today, that of Zoroastrianism, and the literature I will quote you out is in Middle Persian, the language Mani himself knew and spoke. He belonged, Mani, to a circle of Judeo-Christians. His father was himself a Judeo-Christian, known as the Elkassites, a group paying particular respect to the ritual practice of baptism. So Mani polemicized against this sect, and founded a new religion, the Manichaean one. This means that he knew quite well the Jewish sacred writings, including the Genesis book, for which he brought one of the most long-lasting criticism. And he built up his own religious vision of the creation process, which is very elaborate, being inspired by Zoroastrianism, which as a religion predated both Manichaeism and Christianity for a few centuries, at least 8 centuries before Christ. Now, as many of you might already know, even better than me, Marc Chagall did a series of illustrations accompanying various books of the Old Testament. And some of these drawings were published in Paris in the 60s under the title Drawings from the Bible. Now, among these illustrations, two are referring to the book of Esther, one of the chapters of the Old Testament. The story has as background the first exile of the Jews during the period of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. Now, Chagall focused what is interesting, and I'm using these examples as in order to better introduce my second term of the comparison. Chagall focused on the two women of the Persian king called in the Hebrew Bible, called in the Hebrew version of the Old Testament Ahasuerus, while in the Greek version of the Old Testament or the Septuagint, he is called by a name more closer to the historical reality, namely Artaxerxes. Most likely, the historical character taken into account is in fact Xerxes I, who reigned by the 5th century, the Achaemenid king who conducted the attack against the Greeks and was defeated at Salamina. Now, the first painting, which you see here and now, portrayed the first wife of the Persian king, Vashti, who is said of not having obeyed the order of the king to show herself in front of the court. So, therefore, together with his viziers, the Persian king banished Vashti, and he began looking for another wife. The second painting of Marc Chagall. So here is text of the Bible. On the seventh day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs in attendance of the persons of King Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king crowned with her royal diadem in order to display her beauty to the people and administrators, for she was very beautiful. But King Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. The king was very angry at this, and his rage grew hot. It grew so hot that Chagall depicted him in red. And on the right side, the queen is full of shame. Now, the second drawing of Chagall represents the second wife of the Achaemenid Persian king, Esther, who was an adopted daughter of a Jewish man working at the court of the Persian king. So his name is Mordecai, and she will come at the Persian court um, accompanied by Mordecai, her adopting father, and um, and she, because she will please so much the Persian king, she will become the new queen of the Persians. Now, one can read in the book of Esther beginning to 5 from 5 to 9. In the citadel of Susa, which is supposed to be, which was one of the capitals of the Achaemenid kings. There are some anachronisms in the book of Esther, because Xerxes was not king with a capital in Susa. But there lived a Jew called Mordecai, says the text of the Bible, who had been deported from Jerusalem among the captives taken away by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He had brought up Hadassah, otherwise called Esther, his uncle's daughter. On the death of her parents, Mordecai had adopted her as his daughter. So the girl pleased the Sasanian king, the Achaemenid king, and won his favor. So Esther is known as the Jewish queen who will protect the Jews who found refuge in the Achaemenid Empire, because some of the close people of the Achaemenid king were against Mordecai, the Jewish man at the court of Xerxes, and which one sees here depicted in Chagall's drawing. And because they were so much against Mordecai, they planned to kill him on the Purim feast. This is what is described in the book of Esther 9:24. Now, what is interesting, and scholars have showed this in detail. I'm referring here particularly to the an article of Almut Hinze, who presented this work in one of the gatherings organized by Shaul Shaked, and they were called Irano-Judaica. And she underlined very well that while in the Hebrew version of the Old Testament, the name of the feast is Purim, or to cast pur or lots, in the Greek version of the Old Testament, the feast is called Furtia, which was identified by scholars as the Greek version of the Persian term known as Fravardigan, which is an Iranian feast in honor of what one calls in Avestan, one of the old Iranian languages, Frawashi, or the guardian spirits of the deceased ones. So one identified recently, Professor Gronet identified recently the feast as this feast is represented symbolically in this on Bactrian silver plate of Sasanian style, which was which will come appear later on in late antiquity. From the 7th century, under the form of a lady, you can see here on the right, who keeps in her hand an incense burner, which was used in funerary contexts. According to an Arab author, Al-Biruni, Zoroastrians fumigate their houses with juniper so that the dead can enjoy the smell. To the left on this Bactrian silver plate, one identified another a character which holds in the hands a lotus flower and a falcon, which are both good symbols of the new year, or Nowruz in Iran. Now, this story of Esther is a good introduction in the vision of which I resumed here according to the iconographical vision of Chagall, is a good introduction to this second part of my talk, which concerns the cosmogonical vision of the Zoroastrians. So, as I said, Zoroastrianism is one of the most ancient still living religions in the world, which was founded by Zarathustra, the founding text of this religion, the Gathas, are attributed by certain scholars to Zarathustra or Zoroaster. And there are different chronologies for this text. So the chronology of this religion or of its founding text varies between the 12th century before Christ and the 8th century before Christ era. Now, this so here you can see the context of the silver plate where one can. Now, the vision of the narrative of the Zoroastrian creation process arrived to us by means of a much later writing known as Bundahishin, or the original creation. Um, even though written down by the 9th century of Christ era, after the Arab conquest of Iran, it is supposed to have gathered much older elements preserved and transmitted orally. So this could be the object of another academic talk. Um, the narrative preserves a cosmogonic scheme which is present in the Avesta, the main liturgical text of the Zoroastrians, which is as old as the Achaemenid Empire or the background of the story of the Jewish queen Esther. Now, I would leave the texts to speak by themselves so that you may have a direct comparison with the book, with the Genesis book. And I accompanied each day, each moment, each step of the creation process according to the Zoroastrian vision by some other images. They are taken out of ossuaries which were found in Central Asia and which are like this one, which is dated by the 7th to 8th century, and where various characters are depicted and which were identified as the Amesha Spenta, or the beneficial immortals, which are supposed to be patrons of each one of the fundamental elements of the creation process. Now let's see what the above mentioned text, Bundahishin, says about the creation process. So first, he created the sky. He is Ormazd, or the god, the great god of Zoroastrians. He created the sky, bright, visible, distant, in the form of an egg made of shining iron. First he, Ormazd, or the great god, fashioned the sky in 40 days. He rested 5 days. And you can see on the right side, you can see Shahrevar, or one of the immortal, of a beneficial immortal. This is one of the most recent translations of the original term Amesha Spenta, Amakhraspand in Middle Persian, which is supposed to be the patron of the sky and which was identified on one of the ossuaries of Central Asia. Water. Now, the second step of the creation process includes water. He fashioned water from the essence of the sky. Second, he created the water in 55 days. He rested 5 days. Now here what you see depicted is Hordad, or the patron of the waters, which is represented under the form of a female character who keeps in mortar in one hand and a stem in the other. As researchers of Professor Grenet underlined, because he did the identification of these characters. Now, the third step is the earth. Third, he created the earth from the water, round with wide open spaces. He fixed it in the very middle of the sky. In the earth, he created the essence of the mountains that would later flow from it. Third, he created the earth in 70 days. He rested 5 days. And what you can see here is Spandarmat, the patron of the earth. The fourth step of the creation is the moment when the vegetation or the plants are created. Fourth, or must, he created the plant. It sprouted up initially in the middle of the earth, several feet tall, without branch, bark, or thorn, moist and sweet. Its nature contained all the species and vital forces of plants. To aid the plant, he created water and fire. Fourth, he created the plants in 25 days. He rested 5 days. So what you can see here is Amudad, or the patron of vegetation, here depicted again on the form of a female character which holds a plant in her hands as a patron of vegetation. The fifth step is the creation of animal. Fifth, he fashioned the soul-created cow in a vase in the middle of the world. It was white and bright like the moon. Fifth, he created cattle in 75 days. He rested 5 days. And here the Bachman or Vohumanach is a patron of the animals and is depicted here under the form of a male character, a bearded man with a crown, like any one of these beneficial immortals. This character holds a spoon or a like instrument for libation and a plate on which one can see an animal. Unfortunately, maybe here you cannot see very clearly, but there is an animal, a pig or a wild boar. So this was one of the main arguments in the identification of this character as Wachman, which is known from the text as a patron of animals or of cattle. So all these Amesha Spenta or Amachraspandan have crowns, not because they would be kings, but they are presiding, each one of them is presiding over one of the fundamental elements of the creation process. And in the end, mankind thinks he fashioned Gayomad. Gayomad is a name of the first human being, bright as the sun, as tall as 4 measured rods, his width equal to his height. Man will be born from his seed in his likeness. Fifth, he created cattle in 75 days. He rested 5 days. So in this case, I might not have an image because the patron of the creation of the man is Ormas, the great god, and there are very few, if none, representations of Ormas. But so, and Arvahisht is another is the sixth of the is the sixth of the six beneficial immortals, who is a patron of fire. And as you can see in this case, is a very clear example of how the symbolical elements they wear are related to historical elements, because this beneficial immortal has a crown very much alike to the crown of certain Sasanian kings. Now, in the Zoroastrian case, now I would like to conclude my talk by underlining the common elements between the two traditions as well as the differences. So the similarities are that the process of creation takes place in 6 steps, along 1 week in the Jewish case, in the case of the Genesis, along 1 year in the second Zoroastrian case. As you could see, the number of days along which every element is created is much longer. For the man is 75 days, for the plants 25 days. The elements created are slightly the same, but introduced in a different way. The idea of a divine rest is present in both cases. It takes place at the end of the whole process, the 7 days in the case of the Genesis book, and it takes place periodically at the end of each great period of the creation process. Now, the differences might be also important. In the Zoroastrian case, more important than the narrative is a systematic organization of analogies and correspondences. And this is one of the aspects which makes the Zoroastrian cosmogonic view very consistent, fact which is an argument in favor of its originality. I may say, and these are discussions I took into account in my book. I showed you at the beginning of my talk that some scholars thought that the Zoroastrian view was influenced by the book, the Genesis book. Some others thinks to the contrary, like Jakob Neusner, um, that in fact this coherent aspect of the Zoroastrian cosmogony is an argument in favor of its antiquity, and he thinks in fact that the book of the Genesis was influenced by the Zoroastrian vision, fact which is historically can be argued because Jews and Iranians shared the same were in the same areas as the book of Esther um, um, speaks about. Now, the network I'm referring to of correspondences includes a series of 5 periods, the seasonal feasts, which are regularly celebrated along the whole year. They are still celebrated nowadays, but their original cosmogonic meaning was progressively lost, mostly after the Islamization of Iran. Another element of this network of correspondences is the fact that the 5 divinities or beneficial immortals I showed you here, accompanying the text of the cosmogonic narrative. So the 6 characters which preside over each one of the 6 cosmogonic steps, they give the names of the days of the week, for instance, according to the Zoroastrian calendar. And 6 of the 12 months of the year bear their names as well, which makes a strong connection between the cosmogonic view and the calendar, the Zoroastrian calendar, which is also a very important element both of the religion and of the daily life. Um, the whole Zoroastrian vision is very systematic, as the Manichaean one, the one against which St. Augustine wrote various polemical treatises, is organized according to 3 stages. The text I have just read for the Zoroastrian part reflect only the first stage, which is one of pure immobility, of highest degree of abstraction. Two other stages are supposed to follow, namely, on the one hand, the passage to mobility, to a more concrete shape, which remains at the same time abstract as the mythological fancy-like entities, like the primordial mountain Alborz. On the other hand, the final stage includes the installation of the world as we can perceive it here and now. The sky, full of clouds or stars, not just an abstract entity, a sterile idea of a sky in itself. The water of the seas we can sail on, or the lakes around which we can walk, not just the simple idea of water. There are other elements which may make the difference between the Zoroastrian and the Jewish cosmogonic view. The question, for instance, of the ritual integration and the ritual and the liturgical integration of such a vision is a matter of debate. It is present within Zoroastrianism, but at the same time, the Genesis book is very present in the Catholic liturgy of the Easter feast, which accompanies the celebration of Christ's resurrection. In this respect, there is a huge difference between the Catholic and Orthodox tradition, this latter one being focused on the text of the Melkite author John of Damascus. But these are details I may not be able to get into detail now. Before putting an end to this talk, at Giancarlo Polenghi's suggestion, I dare to share briefly with you some of my personal oil paintings, a series inspired by these narratives of creation. While during this pandemic I was painting and sharing the outcome with some dear friends, the text of the Bible remained in the background. At the same time, in their concept, they proved to be closer to the simplicity of the Zoroastrian vision, where each element was created separately and first of all in a very abstract way. I used colors and certain movements in order to express this state of primordial simplicity a great potential on the verge of exploding through subsequent steps. I think it is a good metaphor for any kind of creative act, be it artistic, scholarly, or simply human. There is an extraordinary force of the beginning in each case. The beginning of a painting, drawing, or sculpture, the beginning of an article, a book, or an essay, the beginning of a relationship, and nonetheless, the act of giving birth. As a matter of fact, in many of the old mythologies, the Zoroastrian one included as well, God's creation of the world is expressed as a huge, measureless pregnancy followed by a violent, earthquake like installation of the basic elements: the sky, the water, the earth, the plant, the animal, and the human. Thank you for your patience and presence. Thank you very much. I'm ready.
And thank you, Michaela. I think it's very interesting what you were sharing with us, and of course, a few questions that were coming to my mind. Maybe this is, I don't know if I understood well, but this link between the patrons is not underlying a differences between the Christian Jewish God that it's completely outside and the Zoroastrian God. I mean, are those patrons like different gods, or it's just a figure that it's, I don't know if
You
this
are
is clear.
touching, yeah, you are touching a very sensible chord of this, of the scholarly debates. Was Zoroastrianism monotheistic or a polytheistic religion? So they are called divinities. They are not really gods, but there are other gods like Srosha, which plays a very important role in the creation. In the creation system, because it is not the he helps, he is an intercessor element, he is an intercessor god, helping Ormuzd, which remains an absolutely transcendent, to accomplish the creation process. So it's like it the Zoroastrian system, there is a pantheon, so there are various divinities which are governed by a single god. So it's like a polytheistic system which has the form of a pyramidal of a pyramid, and at the top of this pyramid is only one god. So
Yeah,
it's
I think this is very interesting because in a way something that is very kind of new in the Judaic Christian view is this uniqueness of God that is completely outside everything. So the creator as, but then uh, uh,
this
what I think is very interesting is the 6 steps, like something that is very common. I mean, the two tradition, they have the same path, although the timetable is different, but
yeah.
actually having 6 steps is very, very interesting.
Yeah. This is one of the details, which made one think that Zoroastrianism was influenced by the Genesis book, but things are debatable because this scheme, the sixfold scheme, creation scheme, is mentioned regularly in the Avesta, and the Avesta is as old as Xerxes, or the context where the story of Esther takes place. So it's the problem is that the Zoroastrian tradition is eminently an oral tradition. For a long period, it was transmitted orally, as these things happened in India as well.
And this rich pantheon is a trace of its antiquity and its Indo-Iranian background. So one can argue very much in favor of the stable, autonomous character of the Zoroastrian cosmogonic visions. And of course, they could have shared, but the Jewish vision could have been developed independently. I agree with what certain scholars said. They say it's less important who influenced whom.
Yeah,
More important is how
absolutely.
consistent this scheme or this pattern is within the one tradition or another. And what is to be said and underlined is that this cosmogonic vision is very consistent in the Zoroastrian case, and all these correspondences they develop between the calendar, between the seasonal feasts, because their whole year is a period of celebration. At the end of this, I didn't have time. I might not have. I would. It would have been too long to get into detail
Yeah.
to show how these creation periods match and accompany the calendar, and how they
Yes.
what are the periods according to our Gregorian calendar, because the calendars are not at all the same.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
they still celebrate these periods. Those 5 days, you notice that God in the Zoroastrian version takes a rest during the 5 last days of the bigger period of the creation of each element. So
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
days
Yeah.
are the days which nowadays are considered the feast, the moment of feast, because they conclude a cosmogonic process. So the importance of these periods is that they celebrate
Yeah.
a cosmogonic moment, even though because of the Islamization of Iran, it should be underlined for those who don't know that Zoroastrianism is not a Muslim religion, even though it is still practiced by minorities in a Muslim country like Iran, but
Yes. Yes.
it's not a
Yes.
Muslim religion.
You have two other questions. The first one is this cosmogonic view from the Zoroastrian tradition. Do you think that was kind of related also to other tradition aside the Jewish Christian? I'm meaning Indian or other religious tradition that are around the world are also related to this cosmogony or not?
Well, there is a background, an Indo-Iranian background, and there might have been they had common elements. There are more elements in the practice of rituals. I may not say now into detail if this scheme in 6 steps has an Indian counterpart. I don't think so. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay,
But
okay.
then it is also a problem. For instance, you may ask me, what is this story with the huge pregnancy of the great God, which is also a metaphor of the creation. And this is also debatable because it occurs in a late text and it could have been a later addition. So as long as there is not so much, the metaphor is not very much detailed, it might be a borrowing from Gnostic circles, or I mean, the influences appear beginning with the late antiquity. Then the influences are very strong. The Indo-Iranian background is important, but then Zoroastrianism develops its own patterns. And even
Yeah.
though scholars were often attracted by common terms, but slowly one noticed that despite the common names, the visions are completely different.
Yeah, and another two questions. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the creation is done just with the word,
Yeah.
saying something happened, and then also part of the creation is just uh, cutting, separating things.
Mm.
These are kind of two concepts. Of course, in the Christian view, is the Trinity that is creating. So basically, we see in the Genesis also a prefiguration of the Trinity, like the spirit, that the wind that is going over the sea, for example, and other things. But in the creation, in the Christian view, we see something about the Creator. So the Creator is kind of manifesting himself in the creation. Do you think that also in the Zoroastrian tradition is the same? Is important the word? Is important the separation?
Yeah, there is, I think this could be the object of another class, of another talk, because there is much to be said. But and it's important to show also the particular the particular features in the Zoroastrian case, because the word is important, but maybe in a different way, in the sense that it is a ritual word, is the word of the prayer, which is very important. The god I told you about, which is very important, Sraosha or Srosh, who is supposed to be the ancestor of Gabriel in the Islamic tradition, is the god of the prayer. So he is on the one hand, he is the one who helps Ormaz to accomplish the creation process, and at the same time he is a patron of the prayer, of the main prayers. And for Zoroastrianism, what is fundamental is this fight between evil and good, between demonic forces and the forces. And Srosh is a patron of the victorious battle against demons or against evil, because the arm, the weapons he uses are the prayers. So this is the importance. I mean, everything which is the one can say that the cosmogonic process cannot be fully accomplished, unless one did not pray. And so to say, the cosmogonic function of the word. The word of the prayer is protecting, because, as I said, the cosmogonic Zoroastrian vision has three stages: abstract level, then a passage to intermediary step, and then the creation, the concrete creation itself. And the second stage of this creation process is defined by the antagonism between good and evil forces. And that's interesting, is that firstly, for instance, the earth is said to be plane, and at the second stage, because evil attacks the earth, one has the chance to see a mountain. The mountain is a result of this antagonism. It's a good result of an antagonism. So in this case, also the prayer, and one says that Ormaz, the great god, uh, created the world by reciting Ahuna Vairia, which is a central Zoroastrian prayers. So I think it's an
Okay.
interesting parallel one can do, um, but it's
Okay.
different. It's different. No.
Thank you very much, Michaela. It was very interesting. I think it was also very interesting for us as a school of art, because reflecting on the creation, no matter if it's according with one tradition or another, but anyway, the creation is really very important for every artist. And also, I think that you have done a very interesting work during the pandemia, that also it's a time in which it seems that we are restricted. I mean, we cannot go out, and then of course we hope that with our artwork and everything will start again. So we are going to be part of a new creation. So
Yeah.
thank you, and I hope that we will have the
Participation
opportunity to give other talk with you, Michaela.
with great
Thank you
pleasure.
very much.
very much for having me. Goodbye.
Goodbye.